Hey, so I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about emotional resources because I think this is something that we kind of take for granted. And as someone who went through an extended bout with depression, it became very clear to me that your emotional resources are just as valuable, an asset as your time, talent, and treasure. And so it's actually one of the things that you have to offer. And so being intentional in how you use that currency, that emotional currency, is really important. And as I was talking about this with a friend today, the scripture that came to mind is Matthew 10:14, and I'm going to read it to you out of the Passion Translation. And it says, if anyone doesn't listen to you and rejects your message, when you leave that house or town, shake the dust off your feet as a prophetic act that you will not take their defilement with you. And so I think kind of what God was talking to me about with this is being intentional about the people that you're letting in your life. Because if you have someone who's in your life and is constantly stirring up needless drama, who you find yourself just getting like so frustrated and aggravated with, and don't get me wrong, like there's going to be ups and downs in every relationship. So I'm not saying if you find yourself frustrated, that means you throw in the towel. I'm definitely not saying that. But what I am saying, is that there are certain people who will come into your life and they're not necessarily in alignment with God's plan, nor are they someone that God has actually selected for you to invest your emotional resources in, because of the fact that we know how undeserving we are of God's grace. I think we have a tendency to want to extend that grace and favor as much as possible to other people, because we want to see people as having value, because we want to be seen as having value. And so this isn't about whether other people have value or not. This has to do with being intentional about what you do with your resources. This is about being a good steward. And so it's like, for example, there are many good causes out there, okay? And so it's like if you took all of your money and you gave all of your money to, like these 3 charities, and they may be wonderful charities, but if that is not where God has told you to invest your resources, then you are misaligning and being a bad steward, because you're not using what God has given you for his purpose for you. And so what can end up happening in relationships is that we can be in relationship with people that are sucking us dry. A lot of times these people add needless static that actually inhibits our relationships with the Lord. And don't get me wrong, because sometimes trials in relationships draw us closer to God, and that can be a good thing. But there's also times when people's actions can create this sort of needless dialogue that goes on in our head, where we find ourselves arguing out things, if they've falsely accused us, if they've intentionally misunderstood us. And so we find these like self conversations that are happening that are actually causing this static in our mind that keeps us from being able to have that clarity that's needed to really be able to have a good flow with the Lord. And let me be clear. I'm not talking about like a marriage covenant, okay? I'm talking about like friendships, like the people that you would, interact with out of choice, okay? So this isn't even coworkers, because if you have a coworker there, then it's like, okay, God, give me grace for this situation. But if there are people who are in your life by your choice, that you are choosing to keep them there, and they are having a constant draining negative impact, there becomes the question, Lord, is this someone that you want me to continue in relationship with? Or is this someone where I need to shake the dust off of my feet and move on, right? Or even just, ask God to shut the door. He's perfectly able to cause that other person to get triggered and to retaliate against you by shutting you down. And that's fine too, because God is sovereign. And so even in the moments where it seems like they're the one shutting it down, if God is sovereign, he has allowed that to happen. So it's receiving that if that happens, but not allowing them to create kind of just noise and static in your life, but rather being intentional to sow your emotional resources in a way that is pleasing to God and that is developing your deeper relationship with Him, that is helping to encourage you in your walk, encourage the other person in their walk. And so that's the kind of relationships that we need to be striving to have. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some times where God will pick certain people out and say, this is a person that I want you to minister to. And in those relationships, you go in eyes open, not expecting anything, but just expecting to be pouring into their life. And that's okay. But you can't have all your relationships looking like that. And so it would be better for you to have time just alone with the Lord than to have a bunch of relationships that are just sucking you dry. And so it's about being intentional with those emotional resources. And so anyways, so all that to say, I just want to encourage you to step back and assess, like, are these life-giving relationships? Like, am I able to speak into their life? Are they a blessing in my life? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, seek the Father and ask Him, is this a relationship I'm supposed to be continuing or not? And it doesn't necessarily mean you cut them off completely. Sometimes you just distance yourself a little and you choose how much time you're going to spend in that particular relationship. And so, but again, it's about being intentional. You want to be a good steward with all of your resources, which includes your emotional ones. So anyway, hopefully somebody finds that helpful, and I pray blessings on you and that you might have fruitful, wonderful relationships. God bless you. Have a great day.